All right, let's get this started. So, hello everyone. Today we're going to talk about how to prioritize features to decrease controllable churn. So a little bit more about us before we get started. I'm Dan. I'm the head of go-to-market at Savio. I've been 12 plus years in SaaS. Did a bunch of different companies, two that were acquired and one that went through an IPO. So been building some revenue engines from the ground up. And then Kareem, what about you?
Hey, everybody. I'm the co-founder of Savio, Kareem Mayan. I'm founded four companies, three exits, 20 plus years running product teams at big companies like ESPN and MySpace back when it was bigger than FB. And then for the last sort of 15 years in sort of the smaller startup and scale up situations.
Didn't realize you were at MySpace. That's cool.
Tom was a
I was,
friend, a
yeah,
legitimate friend.
MySpace was just on its way out, pretty much, when I became internet years.
Gotcha. You hit the good years with FB.
Yeah, yeah.
MySpace was a hash.
Cool. All right. So today, what we're going to cover is how the market has changed, how product teams need to contribute to revenue, how to use a churn prioritization matrix to understand what features to build, and then how to use different customer segments to understand the different trade-offs that you can make when prioritizing features. All right. So to get us started, it's never been easier for a customer to leave. It's one of those things where if you kind of think about what's happened in the SaaS world in the last 4 years, it's really easy for customers to leave right now, which has been creating this widespread churn issue for a lot of companies. Again, there's a few things in the last couple of years that have really driven this home for a lot of SaaS products. One, we're in a demand negative market. So from 2020 to 2021, COVID accelerated everybody's growth. There's a handful of SaaS companies that shut down because they were selling to markets that were predominantly face to face, but the vast majority of SaaS companies had their heydays during the COVID era of 2020, 2021, and created all this false demand for software. And then because of that false demand and then kind of markets went soft, it led to a bunch of layoffs, which led to a bunch of churn, which led to a bunch of CFOs trying to cut costs and all these different things. So we're now in a position where um, the markets are not necessarily buying as much as they used to. And with the CFOs putting pressures to cut, you have accelerated churn. And then the other thing that's making it very easy for folks to leave is that there are a ton of options for them to do so right now, like a ridiculous amount. And I remember Kareem last week we were chatting about a story you told me around like at one point, one of the companies that you founded, you were potentially not going to start it because there were already 10 options in the market.
Yeah, it seemed like a lot of competition at the time, and this was, I think, 2008, 2009, and I sort of wish for the good old days when there were 10 competitors for Savio.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So now it would be very lucky if you only have 10 competitors. And I'll show you kind of like how competitive the SaaS space has become. So I did a quick search in Apollo, which is kind of a lead database around the keyword SaaS. And I didn't go complicated here. I just looked at SaaS. Could have added a bunch of different keywords for more AI or pay for use models and that kind of stuff. But there were almost 78,000 companies that showed up in that database. That's a lot of software. When I did the same search inside of LinkedIn Sales Navigator for any company that called themselves software development, there were over 1 million software companies globally. That's B2B, B2C, everything. And then if you kind of take a look at like niching down to even like certain market segments, so just looking at the MarTech map right now, so marketing technology, this is what it looked like in 2023. You can't even see the logo. You just see dots, like a bunch of dots. It's so much. And I remember like 10 years ago when I was just getting started with my career, This map had maybe like 150, 200 on there, which was still a lot of different tools that marketing could use. But, this is almost impossible to kind of understand, what do you use? And if something doesn't work the way you want it to work, it's really easy to just go to something else, right? So like this is the growth in MarTech options since 2011, right? So kind of to your point, Kareem, when you were in this era, not that many options, but 11,000 options now for marketing teams to choose from. And that doesn't even include all the ones that are just not big enough, not on anybody's radar, like the new entrants, like all of that stuff that just didn't make it on the map, that continue to launch almost on a daily basis. Right. So how does all of this impact product teams, right? When you have so many options available on the market, customers have so many things that they can choose from. How does this impact the product team in terms of what to prioritize and when? So the first thing really is really nailing down the problem that's worth paying for. Because CFOs are kind of controlling a lot of software spend and asking a lot of teams to cut down on budget, then everybody who uses software, they're really going through and saying like, is this a nice to have product? Or is this solving a major problem for us that if we did not have this, would cost us millions of dollars in either inefficiencies or lost revenue or whatever. So this is kind of the first thing to really focus on is what is the problem that's worth paying for? Because there's hundreds of problems that you could solve with your software. Some of them that your customers will pay for, some of them that they won't. So really understanding that is kind of the first key thing.
I'll say on this front too, there's like there's a handful of things that like in 2021 you didn't really have to focus on the core must-haves. You could, but there was a lot of free or cheap cash floating around. And with budgets tightening up, 3 years later, you really need to pick problems that your customers are gonna keep paying for, right? The core important hair on fire problems. One of the things that like young PMs were sort of new to their career. They didn't really have to do this because they got in, sort of the last 3 to 5 years when we were in basically a pretty high, high period, an optimistic period where SaaS sales were up. And there's really no everybody who's on here. If you're in product or GTM on the product side, there's no real easy way to do this. Like this is one of the art parts of product management. It's just a tough piece of the job. And product, we feel that product is really historically in the last 5 years, they've been feeding the development beast. Like you've had big dev teams, those devs need stuff to work on, and product was feeding the dev beast. I sometimes think of it like shoveling coal into a locomotive. If you stop doing that, the locomotive is going to grind to a halt and people aren't going to be happy. But one of the transitions we see in this, in this economy in 2024 with belts getting tighter is that product managers are going to have to go back to product management, to talking to customers, to gathering feedback, to understanding what the core problems are so they can identify the core problems that are worth paying for. So back to the basics of the job that you would do 10, 15 years ago.
That's a good point. Yeah, in 2020, late 2020, 2021, you're right, where it's like everybody was buying software to fuel growth. They weren't necessarily buying software to solve problems. It was to fuel growth because the demand was so high. So there was a lot of software that was bought just for like, can we get that incremental growth, right? And because the budgets were so big and cash was cash was basically free, they were buying anything they could put their hands on to try to fuel that growth. And that caused a lot of
unbridled optimism.
Yeah, a little bit, but also another problem where it was like, even for product teams, just trying to feed the beast of engineering. Like if you have that much fuel and that much demand, your engineering teams are growing, your go-to-market teams are growing. At a certain point, it was like efficiency of getting features shipped became like the norm.
Yeah, I think that's true. And we're now in a different era. It's not the
Yeah,
same world as it was 3 years ago.
exactly. So then the other thing that you really need to nail down is getting very clear about the workflows. So the first thing is making sure that you're solving the problem that customers are willing to pay for. Because if you're not doing that, then that's going to yield churn anyways. But let's assume that you are solving that problem and you're solving it well. There's 50 other competitors out there that are solving the same problem as you that folks are willing to pay for. And that is the main, like, that is a big difference right now than it was like 9 years ago, where you have so much competition that are solving the same problem. This is where getting the workflows right really, really matter. And this matters even more if you're in more of a vertical SaaS product, because you're not able to like dog food your own product oftentimes, right? If you're a product manager selling, ERP software to healthcare, like, you're not a healthcare company using an ERP, so you don't understand necessarily all the intricate workflows that somebody on the other side might have. So you have to get in the weeds, and you have to get into the details of exactly how customers and prospects are using that product to get the details right, because those workflows will matter a lot from a churn perspective. It's not as much from an acquisition perspective, because your sales team is not necessarily like training people on a demo. They're showing like, hey, here's how we solve the problem. But customers use the product every single day. And if there's an easier product to use or a better product to use, or, one of your competitors really understands the workflows at an intimate level that you might not understand them, then that's where your customers are going to go and bring their business.
Yeah, this is the sort of the tricky piece around B2B software in particular. Like B2C is a different beast, but for B2B, you guys have a workflow. Just think about your own daily habits online during work hours. Like, you have your own workflow way of doing things. And when you use software that just matches your workflow, it's like magic. Just feels great. The tool gets out of the way and you're able to accomplish. Nobody wants to use the tool, but it's about accomplishing the task with the tool. And you're able to accomplish that quickly and painlessly. But when you're fighting the tool all the time, and then you look around at, tool versus or tool competitors in Google, and you see a whole host of, list pages, you're able to go switch to one of those fairly easily.
Mhm. All right. So if you need to nail the problem that's worth paying for, and you need to get very, very clear about the workflows and very detailed around the workflows, where do you find this information, right? How do you figure this out? And this is where customer feedback coming from your sales team and your CS reps really, really matters, because they're the ones talking to customers every day from a commercial perspective. And they're the ones who are dealing with the objections. They're the ones that are understanding, hey, you know what? We are losing deals because of these reasons, or, we are churning because of these reasons. So they have this intimate knowledge around, the problems that are worth paying for. That's really, really important for product teams to understand. So with this, Kareem's going to walk us through a framework of how to prioritize your feedback and your features and all the product feedback that you get to help you minimize controllable churn as much as you can.
Thanks, Dan. So the other piece I'd add just on the previous slide, Dan, is that it's in addition to sales and CS, and this is, in my experience, this has been a bit of an unpopular, or perhaps an approach that has fallen out of favor. Maybe not unpopular. I think that's maybe not fair. Approach, which is to have product get on the phone with customers, or Zoom with customers, or go sit in the customer space and understand exactly what's going on for a customer when they are using their software. Like, this sort of hits on the understanding the customer workflows better than anybody else, better than your competitors. Like, there's no better way than firsthand research, not filtered through a GTM team, not filtered through a research team, but actually you go and sit there and talk to them. But I will say that that's not the core part of the product job, sitting and interviewing customers. And so the benefit of tying in sales and CS is like they're your proxies on the front lines, talking to customers all day, every day. So doing both those things, ensuring your feedback from sales and CS is heard, and then going out and doing your own firsthand research is highly valuable. Anyways, let's talk churn prioritization matrix. Dan, can you flip to the next slide? So there's four pieces to this, and we're gonna dive into each one. So the four indicators around how important a feature is at reducing churn, or how impactful it could potentially be at reducing churn, are the volume of requests. So that's the number of people that are asking for the feature. The value of requests. So each person who asks for a feature, they're not equal. Some are worth more, some are worth less. And so when you sum up everybody who's asked for a given feature, that can tell you something about how valuable that feature is. Is this an SMB feature that's primarily requested by SMBs, by mid-market, by enterprise customers? So that's hugely important. We'll dive into each of these. The third is requests from ex-customers. So when customers churn, what are the features that they've asked for that potentially could be features for you to fix to prevent future customers from churning? And the last one is sort of existing customers who have asked for features that are deal breakers for them. So if we don't get this feature, implemented, then it's highly likely that we're going to churn. So they're putting up their hands and telling you. And so if you listen to them, you can use that information to build features that will reduce churn. So let's dive into a volume of requests. So the reason you want to track this, you want to understand if a request is really a widespread issue or not. So, if a feature has hundreds of requests from a variety of different customers, it's pretty widespread and important to a broad swath of your customer base. And that's a key factor in determining whether you should build it or not. And so you want to keep track of like votes or the raw product feedback that comes in from customers. You want to roll those up to a higher level feature, and then you sum them up. I mean, it's pretty basic. This is something you guys can do if you're not doing today with a tool like Savio. You can do in a sheet, Google Sheet, and that's where we recommend most folks start until that becomes really painful. And you sort it. You sort your list by most to least features, most to least requested. And that will give you a good indicator about the volume of requests and which features are most important versus least. Fairly basic stuff. I imagine most people on this call are doing something like this already.
What are some of the pros and cons of this approach, Kareem?
The pro is that it's generally quick to get started with. You need a sheet and you need some inputs into the sheet from CS, sales, or product, people who are talking to customers. So it's a good place to start. One of the big cons is that it's fairly coarse, right? So it's just a straight up vote. You don't know who the account is or who the person is who's asked for the feature. You don't know how big they are, how valuable they are. You probably don't have information around sort of more qualitative metrics. Is this a deal breaker or not? And you can capture all that information as well, but it's a bit of a tricky trade-off when you're asking sales and CS to log feedback, because it's not their job. It's related to their job and can really help them hit quota. But at the end of the day, they want to close more deals and they want to expand and care for accounts. And so as product, when you roll out a system like this, there's sort of a tension between capturing all the information that you need and then adoption on the other side, right? The more you ask for, the less likely it's going to be adopted by sales and CS for whom this is not their main priority. I want to go to the next slide. So the second piece in the churn prioritization matrix, is tracking the value of requests. And so you really want to determine how much money or how much MRR is at risk to churn from a given feature. And so the way that you do this is you typically tie in to your CRM and layer in your revenue metrics alongside the account of the person that asked for the feature. And then you sum up all of that revenue in your list, and then you are able to sort based on features that will have the biggest revenue impact with respect to MRR, basically keeping MRR rather than churning it. So when you have those two, the sort of volume of requests and value of requests, it really gives you some interesting axes, because they're not always the same. Like we see this all the time with our own business. We dog food Savio. We use Savio to build Savio. And we, sort of out of the box, we support those two metrics. But we also talk to lots of customers, and they say, we were using a sheet, Google Sheet, before we used Savio, and we were tracking volume of requests. And then we used Savio, we adopted Savio, and we layered in our HubSpot revenue, and we can now track value of requests. And those lists, when we sort them from most popular to least popular, are not the same. Like very often there are, a handful of small, important ICP accounts who are high value to us, who want key features, and those features are not the sort of widespread features wanted by most of our user base. So really, surfacing this information and using it to prioritize can really help drive retention and reduce churn.
Yeah, I was at a company that we actually probably put ourselves behind our competition by 2 or 3 years, because we didn't focus. So we focused on volume of requests for a while, and our strategy was to go up market, and that was like a corporate strategy. So everything that we needed to do was going up market, but we had a very strong self-serve engine, and that accounted for the vast majority of our users. And for a very long time, we were going based on like the number of tickets in intercom. And that was our gauge around like, okay, these are the things that we need to prioritize in a roadmap and fix and all that stuff. And then eventually what we did is we did a bit of this analysis with value of requests. And we realized that it was something like 80% of the volume was tied to about 20% of the ARR. And so when we started flipping that around, we started noticing like the things that mattered for like the accounts that paid us the most amount of money was significantly different than the ones that were paying us the least amount of money. And the value, even though like the volume was like way smaller there, the value was bigger. So we started building these things, and eventually like we were able to like go up market and retain more of those larger customers. But this also, like I would say, like depending on what your strategy is in terms of like corporate strategy, or are you going up market, are you going down market, these kinds of things would matter. The value of requests would matter a lot in those types of initiatives.
Yeah, it really prevents you from listening to the loudest voices in the room, right? It gives you some harder data with which to prioritize.
Or at least validate that the loudest voice is right, because sometimes it is.
Yep.
But sometimes it's not. Yeah.
Very good point. So the third piece is to look at requests from already churned customers. So if churn is a lagging indicator, they're gone, which is sad. And you can't really use that to prevent that customer from churning. But you can use those requests as a leading indicator for future churn on accounts that make the same requests. So the approach here is to make sure you have your list of X customers, people who've churned, and then look at the features that they've asked for. And then you want to cross-reference those to the volume and value lists, the previous two items that we've talked about. And so, the idea there is that maybe the customers who are churning are not your ICP. They're low value or low volume, and they're not customers that you really want more of. And so you can sort of triangulate in on that by looking at the volume and value lists. And if there's signal from all three lists, it's a hint to you that you may want to increase the priority of those features with respect to putting them in your backlog and having your devs execute on building them. So the last piece to look at are deal breakers from your current customers. So these are really the strongest indicator of upcoming churn, right? If you have a customer who tells you we will not stay unless this feature gets built because we have a core problem that this feature will solve, they're basically screaming out loud that we're going to leave unless this thing gets done. So the way to do this is that CS will typically flag features or accounts as churn risk or high churn. And you want to layer those into your spreadsheet or a tool like Savio. And then again, cross-reference those just to make sure that, sometimes customers will churn, and that's okay. It's not the end of the world. Ideally, you want to keep the MRR, but if they're going to go elsewhere because you don't have features that they need that you will never build, then that's just kind of the cost of doing business. You're going to devote your dev resources elsewhere. And then again, same as with the last step, if the features on your active customer deal breaker list line up with your high volume and high value list, that's a good hint to you that perhaps you should be focusing on building those features to keep your current customers happy and keep their revenue and not have them churn.
One thing that I'm starting to get from this framework is how important of a tool the CRM is for the product team. And I know, like, I speak with a lot of product teams, and I know a lot of them don't even have access to their CRM.
Yeah, I wouldn't say the CRM is important as much as the data in it is important, because in product, you don't want to live in your CRM, right? It's a sales tool. Like, I hear this from dev teams all the time. Like, we don't want sales in Jira. We don't want sales in GitHub because that's our space. And I think that's true as well for the CRM. But there's huge value in having access to that data, to be able to use that data when you prioritize or to segment your list of feature requests. So really having a tight tie-in between the tool that you're using to prioritize in your CRM can be a huge win for product teams.
For those on the call, I would go check with your CS team to make sure they are tracking this stuff, right? Are they keeping track of churn customers in your CRM or X customers? Are they keeping track of at churn risk? Is there some sort of flag? Because this is very valuable data for other departments if they're not currently doing this. And I know at some companies I worked at, we had a very strong kind of like revenue operations function that would like make this really easy for everybody to do it. But I've also worked at other companies where it's like every CSM had a note or a spreadsheet or whatever of their book of accounts and had their own notes in there around the ones that might be at churn risk. But there wasn't really a central place for that. So if they don't have this, I would work with them to get this in there, because this is very valuable information for product.
Yeah, it's funny. I actually spoke to a customer last week who, when they use HubSpot, and they were setting up an automation in HubSpot for their CS team. So whenever CS had a call, an automation would fire that would pop up a screen asking for their notes and then asking for any feature requests and the priority of those feature requests for the account that the CSM had just spoken to. And then they were going to pipe that data over to Savio for the product team to consume and sort of integrate into their product planning process. So that was actually, we've seen that in the wild. We recommend sales teams do that. So when sales loses a deal and it's a product or feature related reason, we recommend setting up an automation in Salesforce or HubSpot to fire that data over to Savio for product to use. But I've never seen it done with CS on that side of the revenue house, and it was like, oh, that's genius. One of the things I love about running a business in general is talking to customers who do things with your product that are super, super smart that you've never thought of before, and you're like, ah, that's amazing. If only more people did that, there would be better software all around, and frankly, people's lives would be better off by not using frustrating, annoying software.
Yeah. All right.
So the sweet spot here is really a feature that meets, all four criteria. Those are sort of the obvious features to build. They'll have the most immediate impact on your controllable churn. Obviously, if you have multiple features that hit that sweet spot, I guess on one hand, that's great. On the other hand, your challenge is prioritizing that list. Are you interested in logo churn? If logo churn is an issue, you want to probably focus on your volume of request features that also meet the bottom two quadrant lists, deal breakers and requests from previous customers. If it's NRR or growth, you probably want to prioritize your value of requests quadrant. In terms of sort of things like, in terms of frequency of tracking these things. So like I mentioned this earlier, you're likely doing volume of requests today in some fashion. That's easily the most common thing that we see. Value is tricky because you need to tie revenue into your feature request list. And so you could definitely jury rig things with a tool like Zapier, but it's duct tape and chewing gum and often breaks down. Unless you're using a purpose-built tool like Savio to do that. Requests from ex-customers. So very often what we see is teams will track churn reason, but what teams won't look back at is say, okay, show me in my feature request list, show me all of the features from churned customers. Let me go look at those. So you might have a list where the sort of axes are like company name and churn reason, but you won't go back and look at your request from only churned customers. So that's a bit tricky as well to do in a spreadsheet because it requires that you track account and account status. And that stuff is tough to do unless, again, you're tying into a CRM that will just update that information automatically. And then the bottom right, deal breakers from current customers. Folks will often do this with specific segments or specific customers. So like this is a really important customer to us, or enterprise customers are particularly important. And so we will care more about their features, which is a very sensible approach. But what it doesn't let you do is look at deal breakers from other segments, especially when you get to a certain volume of customers. If you have 10 customers or 20 customers, it's not really that big a deal. But when you have 50, 100, or more, it becomes challenging to do. So other things to note, we know that all feedback is not created equal, and not all customers are created equal. So if you can layer segmentation on top of your feature request list, which is what we're talking about really. In this case, we're talking about customer segmentation. So like, who are your ICPs, your ideal customer profiles, or which customers meet your ICP? They matter more to you than other customers. Dan and I were just talking about a couple of accounts that churned just this morning. They churned over the last week. We were talking about it this morning for the webinar. And, I was like, I'm actually not that worried about them because of a churn because they're not our ICP at all. So, it's not a surprise that their needs and what we offer are sort of diverging. So, when you can segment your list by ICP, or, which segments really, we call them lighthouse customers. So like, they're the ones that like, they get it, they understand where you're going, they're aligned with sort of from a strategic perspective, they see the vision of where your product is going. Like that's another segment to really pay attention to. And then sort of the last piece, which is, what I was mentioning earlier with our churn customers, which ones should you ignore? Like if they're low value plans or people on legacy plans or who signed up, 4 or 5 years ago and are not really where the product is going to go, and you don't want more of those customers. And it's okay to ignore those requests. That's perfectly fine. But the key here is really being able to slice and dice your list based on properties of your accounts that you care about, which is super important in order to hone in on the key features to build.
Yeah, I got a question here that came in while you were talking. What about if the feature requests matches your current product strategy? This should be a criteria if you want to avoid becoming a feature factory. I think this last point here is kind of what you were talking about, Kareem, where which customers you ignore, which pieces of feedback or requests you ignore for strategic reasons, whether that's your product strategy or, in my case, when I was at that company where we were going up market, we paid a lot less attention to the down market stuff. Just from a strategy perspective, it was aligned, right?
Yep, that makes sense.
Cool.
So just quick highlights or sort of 30-second synopsis of what Savio does. We've sort of been talking a bit about it, but it really helps you do 3 core things. So the first is it helps you understand the value of your feature requests. You get the number of requests sort of for free. That's sort of the basic feature of Savio, but Savio will tie into your CRM, pull in your CRM data, your account properties, and help you sort your list by MRR and slice and dice your list by account properties pulled in from your CRM. The second thing that it does is it provides guardrails for your GTM teams to log product feedback using native integrations with tools like Zendesk or Intercom or the Savio Chrome extension, and it helps you field all that information. So you pick the person, you who's tied to the account. You can pick importance to customer. So is it a deal breaker or a must have? And so later on, when your GTM teams log your feedback in a structured way, later on on the product side of the house, you can slice and dice your feedback by those fields. Show me all of the deal breakers from enterprise accounts, as an example. And so this sort of tying into that, because it ties into your CRM and pulls in your revenue data and account data from Salesforce and HubSpot, is it lets you hone in on the key features that are important to your important customer segments. So, this could be high risk accounts. This could be enterprise accounts. This could be most recent feedback. There's sort of a variety of ways to slice and dice your feature requests using your HubSpot or Salesforce data.
For those who are either on an older plan or one of the smaller plans, or you're not a Savio customer and would like a demo, I'm just going to drop a link to book a demo request here, and then we'll go into some Q&A. All right, use the Q&A or the chat to drop your questions. We're here for a few minutes to answer anything. Kareem, even using just Savio as an example, like I've known Savio for 5 years now. I've only been here since January, but I've known you guys for a while, and the product's changed quite a bit in 5 years. How did you use some of the feedback and the data that you've collected to kind of like address your churn over the years?
Yeah, I mean, there's sort of been 3 pieces, right? So you start out with a vision for what the product should do, and that for us was driven by having this problem at previous companies. Like I've been PMing for 20 plus years, as has my co-founder Ryan. And so when we sold our last company, we said, what are the problems that we've had that have really annoyed us that we feel like could be impactful towards revenue? And this was the one that it had come up, at every company I'd worked at, every product I'd worked on. And so that was one piece. The second piece is using customer feedback. So we built the sort of MVP, we, hustled for our first set of customers, and then we paid very, very, very close attention to who those customers were. Did they get it? Like at the early stages, you find customers who really get it and understand where the product is going, what the vision is. They have the problem, they understand it. And so we paid a lot of attention to those folks. And we sliced and diced our feature request list at very early stages by that I mentioned earlier, by what we call lighthouse customers. So what do our lighthouse customers want? And those were features that we gave extra weight to drive acquisition of more of those folks, but also to keep those folks happy, because they understood what we were looking for. And then there's sort of the third piece, which is like, seismic changes in the industry, and everybody on this call, I'm sure, is impacted by AI. And so, the question is really, okay, well, in 5 years from now, what is the world going to look like? Is AI going to do more or less of the heavy lifting? And the answer is more, I think.
Yeah.
Or I feel confident about that. I feel like everybody on here probably feels confident about that as well. And so then you have to sort of think about, okay, what would an AI-ified, product look like? We were starting today as an AI first product. What would that look like? And how do you sort of integrate, those features or problems that you can solve using AI to make a better experience for your customers?
Yeah, because that changes the game too. Like AI, everything's AI now. Some of it's useful and some of it's not, as we're experimenting with our own business. Like we've had some luck with some AI tools, and a lot of wasted time with some as well. And we're always thinking about how can we plug in AI into Savio. But the other thing that it's going to cause, it's like with AI and like low code or no code tools, that kind of stuff, the barrier to entry for launching more software is going to be even lower than what it currently is. So at a certain point, it's going to become like that 11,000, map of MarTech might be 20,000, and like, how do you deal through that? That's going to be interesting.
Yeah, I think the ultimate answer is really just being close to your customers like that. At the end of the day, I think that is one of the unchanging things when running a business. If you're closer to your customers than your competitors, you will, especially in this B2B space, and in particular with vertical software, are niche software. Like if you're close to them, you're going to be able to build a product that better solves for their workflows than other other products, other competitors.
Yeah. All right. We have a question here from Andrea, a bit of context setting and then a question. So sometimes when you have product focusing mostly on deal breakers, which I agree is one of the most efficient ways to drive retention, feels like we create an environment where we only respond to threats. I lead an onboarding team, which is highly customer facing, and I'm constantly struggling with product where it feels my team is hijacking our roadmap, filling it with enterprise customer requests. They are high impact features, but still it feels we only respond to threats, and there's constant struggling to decide where to go next. How do you make this smoother? That's a very good question.
It's a great question. So one of the things I would do here is get on the horn with your enterprise customers and do some sort of proactive customer discovery around their needs, and see what the commonalities are, what the patterns are. The best way I found, you mentioned constant struggling. I'm guessing, I'm not sure if that's constant struggle within your team or constant struggle with product. It says you're struggling with product. So like one of the best ways I found to get buy-in on this stuff is to give product evidence. Either video, I mean, the best evidence is to get product on the phone with when you're doing your enterprise customer, discovery or customer conversation calls, because they hear it from the horse's mouth. They can validate it themselves. They can poke at it a little bit by having a conversation with their customers, or sorry, with your enterprise customers. And that, in my experience, that's where the struggle goes away. I have a friend who, quick sort of sidebar. I had a friend who was running, his job was to improve customer experience for Credit Suisse banks. And he was presenting to a room full of VPs in Switzerland. And he was like basically getting no traction. And he said, I'm going to call our customer service and try and get, a task, get an account opened. And so he picks up the phone and like basically, this was pre-live stream, this 20 years ago. He basically puts the call on speakerphone and he said like all eyes turned towards the stage where he was presenting when before he had basically, zero attention. And the task was super hard to accomplish. And he realized that all the VPs, none of them used the bank. Like their wives did it, their assistants did it, somebody else did it for them. It's a bunch of old Swiss guys. And so then one of the VPs put up his hand and said, call a competitor. So he called the competitor and it was easier. And he immediately had buy-in through sort of this notion of empathy with and firsthand experience. So doing that with product is helpful. One of the other things here, which may be a truism for your business, Andrea, is that your enterprise customers you may be prioritizing the right things. Like if they pay you a lot more and they make up the bulk of your revenue and they're high impact features, I mean, it sounds like those all sound like good things to know. And if you're, I try and unpack why is there struggle? Like my guess is that there's not enough buy-in. And I think by getting product on the phone, you will get more of that buy-in, but maybe there are other reasons as to why there's struggle. Around roadmaps. I mean, Dan, you can maybe speak to this a bit more because
Yep.
this has been your sort of piece, but roadmaps are highly political documents. And so Dan, why
Yes.
don't you take it from here?
Yeah, yes, roadmaps are highly political documents. There's always trade-offs to be made, and I think that's where a lot of this tension is present at a lot of companies because the trade-offs are not known. So what I would recommend, like if you have the ability to tally up like the number of feedback, the volume, the value, all of that stuff, there's a couple things you might be over indexing on some of these enterprise accounts. If it's like a one-off, it's not widespread, it's one account, it's not your largest one, that could be happening. So you might want to keep track around and like, okay, what does the middle want? Because you're likely not going to go do what the bottom wants, but what does the middle want? Is the middle tallying up to more than the single kind of enterprise accounts asking for? That's one thing to look at. The other thing is sales overselling? Like I've been on the sales side of the equation my entire career, and there are teams where there were reps on the team that oversold. right? They sold something that didn't exist, and then it's, the onboarding team kind of gets the shit the shit end of it, and they put in the feature requests and that kind of stuff. So like that could be something to look at as well as like sales selling too far ahead of the roadmap. Um, the other thing to look at too is look at the reasons why sales is losing deals, because it's usually a leading indicator of what kind of churn you're going to get. And a lot of folks kind of look at churn and like the CS side or the onboarding side of the equation. And they're like, okay, here are the things that are being requested. We didn't do these things, we're losing that account. The reality is that an account, like, customers don't like to leave. They have the ability to leave, and it's fairly easy to leave now, but they don't like to leave. So when you churn or you figure out you're going to churn an account, sales has usually figured that thing out like 9 months in advance, right? Because they're losing deals to the competition for those exact same reasons of the things that you can't do. So I would look a little bit at the sales side. Are they overselling, or are they losing deals for certain reasons that, are indicators of like, hey, before it hits onboarding, these are things that we could go build that would actually help onboarding a lot more, because you would get less of these requests and it would feel less like a threat. But at the end of the day, if your NRR is not where it needs to be and your logo churn is up, then that's the thing that you want to plug. And as much as it might feel like, hey, you're just responding to threat, that might be the right thing to do right now for your business to make sure that those metrics are in place before you go build anything else anyways. All
Definitely.
right. Another question here. Do you factor in the development life cycle in prioritization? For instance, if something will take 6 months plus, should other quicker wins get a higher priority?
Yeah, great question, Ben. So I think about product management as the art and science of getting good ROI from your devs. You've got inputs, customer feedback, strategy, your brain. You've got outputs, features, and you've got the raw materials to help you make that of your dev team. So yeah, for sure. If you're, the one of our favorite sorts in Savio is high priority or high value and low effort. We're very much a fan of high ROI leveraged features. One of the things that's maybe not obvious, I started my career as a developer, and in the development world, like, you often think that if I work really hard or work a lot on this thing, it's really valuable for customers. And I've been disabused of that notion very too many times, unfortunately, before I've really learned that lesson, which is like, often you can spend a little bit of effort and have a very high impact on revenue or customer satisfaction or NPS. And so we very much like to look for those features and consider the dev lifecycle or time to build when prioritizing. Absolutely.
It's always good for like if you think about the culture of a company and go into market and like everybody feeling like positive and that builds momentum and stuff, it's always good to develop at least a little bit of features that sales and CS can see themselves in and say like, hey, you know what? I asked for this 2 months ago. It's now ready. Like, amazing. Right. And those quick wins when you can squeeze them in, maybe you have one dev cycle that's opened up and you're like, okay, what's a 2 week sprint, 3 week sprint that we can like quickly put in there that a customer or sales rep has asked for? That helps build momentum within the teams, and you get better feedback from your teams doing that. Helps with collaboration, helps with the culture of the company. So I would very much pay attention to um, dev cycles in there, because if all you're doing is working on the things that are meaty, that they are obviously important, but if all you're doing is rebuilding or replatforming for 6-12 months out, your top sales reps are going to see that and go sell an easier product somewhere else, and your CSMs are going to deal with a lot of crap in the meantime, right? So it's a fine balance around like trying to squeeze in those quick and dirty features that folks are asking for, because if you can do it, then that shows momentum to your go-to-market team and your customers as well.
Yeah, related to that, your GTM team are your proxies, for talking to customers. They're out there in the field. And one of the things we say when onboarding a new customer is, sort of as I mentioned earlier, your sales and CS teams, it's not their job to log this feedback, but you can, and often people will come to us and say, we're using the system, a spreadsheet or whatever, and it feels like I'm sending feedback into a black hole and I'm getting really discouraged. I don't want to do it anymore. And so we say to product, hey, your teams want to do this. This is going to drive revenue for them and for you and for the company. So like throw them a bone, like find a leveraged low effort, high value feature that sales or CS is asking for soon after you roll out Savio and ship it, because it'll tell them that you care. When they log feedback, it's not going to a black hole. You care about getting their feedback and you're going to act on it, which will only encourage a positive feedback loop with them continuing to give you more.
Another question here. Any advice on how to prevent the customer from taking advantage of it? As Andrea said, some of the product releases are reactive just to keep the customer. When they get a taste of that, all they want of getting what they want, they'll just continue.
That's interesting. I mean, I think this is where your judgment comes in. Like some customers are great and respectful and appreciate and understand what it is that you're trying to do and will ask for features that they need. Other customers will be needy and will just continue to ask to get their pet features built in. So this is where your judgment as a product team comes in to say, like, those are features we're not going to build, and these are features we are going to build. But in general, I would be like, I want all the feedback. As when I put my product hat on, I want all the feedback, and it's going to be up to me and the other folks who make these decisions around the Savio roadmap to decide what it is we're going to build. And if we have a bunch of noise on the roadmap, that's fine. We can just filter it out in our brains. But I would err on the side of having too much feedback rather than too little, because in the too little scenario, you're really you're kind of you've got no map and you're trying to get from A to B. It just is much harder to do it on intuition versus using customer facts.
I think the other thing to think about is, like, does it fit into your company strategy and your product strategy as well? Because if they're asking for things that fit within your strategy, then go build it. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, your customers are asking for good things that fit within that realm. They're just going to be happier customers. If it's far outside of your product strategy, then make it clear to them, like, hey, here's where we're heading as a company. Here's how the product strategy is heading. No need to like talk about roadmaps or anything like that. Just saying, like, hey, here are the areas that we're investing in now. And if it falls outside of that, just be very clear and transparent with them. Like, hey, what you're asking for falls outside of our core areas. For most companies or most customers, like, they'll take that as just information, and it's not going to impact a whole lot. There are some demanding customers out there that will try to take advantage of this, and those are bigger decisions of whether or not you want to keep them as customers, right? And that's a very different type of strategy. But if they're asking for things that fall within the product strategy, then go for it. Like, you might get some pushback internally around, like, hey, we might become a feature factory or whatever. But if they're asking for things that you were going to build anyways, then it doesn't matter. It's just, means that you're really in tune with your customer base and they'll be happy.
Yeah, rereading this question, like I think that, like, I've run into situations where you're like, if you, as a product team, if you play things in a way that's not desirable, you end up becoming effectively like a one-off vendor to build custom software for a noisy enterprise customer. And that sucks. That's not a situation you want to be in when you're running a SaaS business. You've got a demanding enterprise customer. They pay you a lot of money, and they ask for specific features that just don't align with product strategy. And it's hard to sort of have those conversations to say no, especially if they make up a large chunk of your revenue. So I feel like this is a coworker of Andrea, because you mentioned, as Andrea said in here, but I empathize with you. That's a difficult situation to be in. And very often, like, one of the ways to handle those situations with those sort of demanding enterprise customers is to is to go up the chain to your CEO or to your VPCS and say, look, like, this is a strategic decision. Do we want to become effectively a custom dev shop for a noisy enterprise customer, or do we want to build a SaaS product? Because to me, those decisions around, do we want to keep this customer that's paying us a lot of money is not sort of above product's pay grade to a certain extent. Your CEO may say, yes, we want to build those features, and then on the product side of the house, have a decision about is that the kind of place you want to stay or not?
Bigger decisions.
Bigger decisions. It's a tough situation to be in. I empathize.
Yeah. All right. We have one last question here that we'll have time to answer. So when using public and private boards for voting on features, how do you maintain your proprietary information or details of requests from getting out too soon? How do you keep the feedback relevant for higher priority on the roadmaps when customers, brackets high volume, are upvoting something that is not on the roadmap?
Yeah, good question. So also a bit of a tricky one. Often it depends on the sort of the way the voting board is set up. So on the first question, how do you maintain your proprietary information or details of requests from getting out too soon? So it's a couple ways you can handle that. So one is you cannot make the voting board entirely public. You can restrict it to your logged in users only using single sign-on. That's typically what we will do, or what we recommend for people who are concerned with that. And ultimately, like, by choosing a publicly accessible version of your feature request list, which is what a voting board is, you're trading off that risk. Like, if you feel very strongly that that's something you don't want, then I would say you should probably not have a voting board and just collect all of your feedback privately through a tool like Savio, or through internal processes in a spreadsheet. The second question: how do you keep the feedback relevant for higher priority on the roadmaps when customers are upvoting something that is not on the roadmap? So I think this situation is like, customers are asking for stuff that is not, on our call it 3, 6, 12-month roadmap. I think the approach here is like, well, it's sort of interesting, right? Like, customers are asking for stuff that you're not building. Well, maybe you should course correct. Maybe the customers are right. You mentioned high volume customers are asking for stuff. So like, maybe you're getting a lot of requests, but they're requests not from high value customers. And so, I would suggest to you that a couple things. One, are the customers right? Maybe we should reevaluate our strategy. Two, layer in your revenue metrics to see if the high volume also relates to high value. And then three, it's okay to say, like, we're not going to build this stuff. And one of the risks, we have an article on sort of seven challenges around running a public voting board. One of the real risks is that you have a whole bunch of customers who ask for stuff and they don't get built. Like, you can go back to Jira feedback boards from 15 years ago with features that are not built, with like hundreds or thousands of requests saying, like, guys, it's been 15 years. Like, why is this simple thing not built? And that's
I get the same with Salesforce.
Yeah, totally, right? I mean, they've been around for 20 plus years, those products. And so it's just one of the risks. And I think, the answer there is, if you're confident that your product vision is right and those features that customers are asking for are not ones you're going to build, I think the answer there is develop a thicker skin and just have more conviction in product direction. These are sort of all trade-offs around having public voting boards and bringing customers into sort of to co-create your product. You lose control by doing that. And, for some companies, it pays off very well. And for some companies are more uncomfortable with that idea, with that approach.
The fourth element I would add there, Kareem, too, is layer on your customer segments. So beyond ARR. So maybe, yes, you might need to course correct, but maybe you can ignore it, right? Because maybe you'll find out that 95% of that high volume upvote is coming from a customer segment that you are not going after anymore. So it comes back to your company strategy, like, who are you focused on? Are you on SMB, mid-market, enterprise, like all these different things? Where are you heading? What's your product vision? And does that customer align with the strategy? And then you kind of go from there. Like if the customer aligns, then maybe you course correct, but you might just be able to ignore the request because they're not the right customers requesting anyways.
I'd like to answer this last question from Ben because this is a pet topic of mine, which
All
is what
right.
about innovation? Is it enough to just build what customers are asking for or what your analysis suggests? So like to me, there's sort of two ways of building. There's invention and innovation. And invention is building something brand new. Like there was no iPhone or no iPod, and now there is an iPod. It's just sort of a category changing product. But I think the truth is that most of us are innovating on an existing product. Um, you know, the first business I ran was an online scheduling tool for solo massage therapists, hairstylists, etc. And so the tools at the time were like Mind Body Online, and they were for like multi stylist or multi massage therapist clinics, and were overly complicated for the soloist. So like that was an innovation on sort of an existing. It was a skew on it, or a new take on an existing business. And so I'd call that innovation. So, but the real question is it enough to just build what customers are asking for, what your analysis suggests? I mean, I said the answer is no. You have to have, and this is where sort of the product strategy piece comes in, or product taste comes in. Like you have to have a theory. Like the question I like to ask for product strategy is, what's the world going to look like in 5 years? So one of the reasons we started Savio, we talked to 50 different PMs, and they were all keeping track of feature requests in their. One guy had a Gmail inbox system of labels and tags. Lots of people using spreadsheets, and they all seemed fine, more or less, with what they were doing. And we said, well, in 5 years, are people going to be doing stuff this way? And we said, absolutely not. Like you have a product team, multiple inputs, GTM teams logging feedback. Like it's just not going to work that way. And so you have to have some conviction around the theory you have about what the world is going to look like. And where I think customer feedback comes in is when a lot of high value customers are asking for the features that align with your theory or your strategy. I mean, those are really the sort of sweet spot features for to build. But I think just taking it, it's funny. Like we look at Savio, and we have highly requested features that we have not built, mostly because they've not bubbled up to the top of the priority list. But we often have the conversation like, what if we just knock these off one by one from highest value to lowest value, just kept going through that list? Like, would our business be better? Would it be worse? Or would it be the same? We don't know the answer, but I sometimes think like, and I've been doing product for 20 plus years. I sometimes think product will they just overanalyze and navel gaze. Like sometimes just like go look at the list, have some quick skews on the list, some sniff test your theories, and then just go build. But build based on evidence, but just go build. Don't spend too much time navel gazing about what to build. Perhaps it's just as simple as listening to your customers where those things align with where the product strategy is. That's the sweet spot, and you should just go build those. But good question, Ben. I mean, I think that's probably have a webinar on that topic alone.
Cool. All right, we're over time here. We're going to wrap it up. Thank you everyone for joining. Thank you for everybody who's going to watch the recording later. We'll see you next time.
See you later.
Bye-bye.